Okay, thank you, Professor Penina, for agreeing to be part of the Global Feminist Project. So to start, we are going to talk about your life, your background about your life. Like, as you think about where you are today, how would you depict the journey that brought you to this point? For example, what are the central commitments in your life? What does your career look like? And what do you consider to be the most significant lifetime achievement professionally? Yeah, Karibu.
Wow. Thank you. First of all, I'm very happy to be associated with this program. I think it's a very important program, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Okay.
Now, in terms of my, at my age, I've come a very, very long way. So it's a bit difficult to summarize to summarize my work and my life. But let me just try to pick some of maybe the highlights.
Okay.
Maybe starting from my family, I was born into a family of 7 children.
Wow.
Yeah, I've gone too far back.
Okay.
And then I went through the normal processes of going through education up to the university. And for many years, I was a professor at the University of Dar. Specifically, I was a professor at the Department of Creative Arts. Okay. But even at the university, I have a long career in different areas. For example, I've played some parts in terms of the administration of the university. I have served as head of department, as dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. I also served as the chief academic officer, which is the equivalent to a deputy vice chancellor for academics in the university. I also served as the professor for the professorial chair of Mwalimu Nyerere, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere professorial chair on Pan-Africanism. So that is from the academic and the administrative background. But in that process, I was also involved throughout my career in issues related to gender equality. And I can say that this started very early on. And this was during my early years as an academician, because as soon as I was employed by the university, myself and my fellow colleagues, especially the women colleagues, we realized that there were many hurdles that were gender related in terms of our advancement as academicians. And we were like the initial crop, the initial generation of female academicians. And the academic field was very male dominated at that time. So there were quite a lot of hitches and hindrances which we felt if we didn't address our academic career progression would be affected. So we started the movement to fight for gender equality very early on, like this was in the 1970s, 1980s. Wow. And we had, for example, to fight to change the policies that were gender discriminatory. We had to fight for space so that the female academicians could have equal space in terms of academic advancement as the men. For example, if I give you an example, with our male colleagues, it was very easy for them to go for further studies. But with us, we were in the time where we were producing children, right? Yeah. So it wasn't easy for someone to just up and go and leave a 4-month baby or a 4-year-old baby and just go abroad for a master's or PhD studies. So we had to fight for how the university could consider enabling the female academicians when they go out for studies, whether they could go with their young children. Or we had to fight for local scholarships so that we can do our studies as well as look after our families. So these initial hindrances to our academic progression really opened up my eyes to the need for a wider gender struggle. And that is how now I got involved into many aspects of gender activism from that time until now. And I've been active in the gender activism area alongside my academic progression, because I realized early on that the academics, I could move on, but the gender issue was a constant reminder or a constant hitch to whatever one did in whatever type of career that one undertook. So, and then in short, I got married. Unfortunately, my husband died, but I have 2 children, a boy and a girl. Okay. So in brief, maybe that's my background.
Thank you, Professor Penina. I think if you could like highlight a bit of the some of the things you did at the university. I know of the pre-entry program that was able to like allow more girls in school, especially for the sciences, and other kind of like program that you're able to do as part of your career background, the Tuseme project and things of that nature.
Now, in the area of gender, I really participated quite actively in the effort to try to bring about change here and there. So I'll give a number of examples of things I was involved in. For example, when I was the Deputy Vice Chancellor, the situation of girls, gender equality at the university was really very, very disheartening. And especially in terms of admission, the admission of girls was only about 19% at that time. This is like in the late 1980s, early 1990s. About 17, 19%, and in the sciences, it was as low as 3%. So then I had to push very hard so that in the strategic plan that the university was coming up with after I joined the management team, which was starting 1994, the strategic plan starting 1994, I had to fight very hard so that we could have strategic objectives to bring about gender equality in the admission of university students. So we had to put targets, and at that time we had a target whereby we said in the next 10 years, we should reach 50-50 admission for boys and girls at the university. And of course, it was going to go progressively. So we started with 10% increase, 20%. The idea was that after 10 years, we should have equal admission. And on that point, I must say, there's been a lot of progress in that area. And in quite a lot of faculties at the moment, the admission really, some of them have reached 50%, many of them are at 40%. Of course, the only problem is that when you come to the hard sciences and engineering, there's still a problem. So if you take the average, the university admission for girls is still around 35%. But if you look at individual faculties, especially the humanities and the business school and all that, law, some of them have gone as far as 50 or 40%. Now, while we put that in the strategic plan, and then it became, of course, mandatory. Once it was in the strategic plan, it became mandatory for all faculties to make sure they reach the targets which we have put in the strategic plan. But now the challenge was with the sciences, because the science faculties and engineering, they had no objection to increasing the admission for girls. But the problem was they were not getting enough girls who were qualified to enter the university. And the main issue here was girls were having a lot of challenges at the level of secondary school, primary secondary school, access of girls to science subjects, performance of girls in science subjects was still very problematic. And there weren't enough programs to address the challenges of science, performance in science subjects for girls. So a lot of girls were not performing at the level of coming to the level of being able to be admitted to the university. But when we looked through the data, we found out that actually quite a number of girls were on the margins, like they missed admission to the university by 1 point or by half a point. It was like something would be done for them to enter the university. So we decided whereas we would negotiate with the government and other people to improve the performance of girls at secondary school level, but at that particular moment, we still wanted to take action to increase admission of girls into the sciences. So we decided to start a program, which we called the pre-entry program for girls, whereby we would take girls who missed admission to the university by 1 point, the admission to the university, 1 point or half a point or whatever. So the program would admit those girls into a program of study 8 weeks before the start of the academic year. So they would undergo a science program for 8 weeks, whereby they would be taught whatever they are being taught at the level of A level, secondary school level, advanced level. And then they will take an examination after 8 weeks. So those who pass that exam, we use that criteria to admit them to the university. So they got a special entrance into the university after going through that pre-entry program. And I must say it really worked very well. After a number, maybe after about 5 or so years, over 500 girls got into the university using that program. And after that, even other universities adopted that program for science subjects and for engineering. And it did help to push up the number of girls that went into the university. So that's one thing which I can say I had the privilege to contribute to at the level of the university.
Okay.
But besides that program, of course, there were many other things that we were battling with in terms of gender equality, because there was a lot of sexual harassment. There were a lot of issues in terms of gender equality, even among the faculty. There were even cases of sexual harassment among, between academic staff and students. And we had to come up with stiff rules and regulation that if any member of staff was caught having doing sexual harassment, they would actually be sacked. And that it caused quite a lot of sensation, but we did actually sack quite a number of academic staff members on the basis of their sexual harassment of students. And that sent a message that girls had a right to be at the university, and the staff, they should not think sexual harassment is just something that they can do at will. Of course, I believe it did help to curb the sexual harassment to a certain extent. It didn't finish it, as you know, up until now. There's still some cases, but at least it did send a message that sexual harassment is not tolerated by the university. Later on, we even came up with a sexual harassment policy at the university. So now people are aware that this issue of sexual harassment is not for fun. I mean, you can get into real trouble if you engage in sexual harassment. And so that was at the level of the university. But then during my work in the department, I was very active in the area of culture and development. And I was very active in my academic career in that sector. So that took me to a lot of work on the ground, a lot of work, working with villages, working with the programs on the ground, and working hand in hand with the communities. Now, as I conducted that work with my colleagues, I really came face to face with the issues of gender inequalities in our society. They are so stuck. I mean, we were trying to talk of, for example, development. So, for example, we had a big project on using the arts for social mobilization for development. So we would go into a community, work with the community for several weeks to try to analyze what their developmental problems were, how they can use their own cultural processes to address those development issues, how they can engage with the government to make sure that they solve the problems. But as we did that, every problem that emerged, it was very clear that there were serious gender issues, gender inequalities. For example, if you talk about the problem of water, it was the women who really suffered if there was no water in the community. I mean, whatever you pick, the issue was women inequalities, women oppression. I mean, it really hit me very hard that there are a lot of cases of gender inequalities in our society at large. Then this pushed me to think that there must be something that can be done to address this issue. We can't just leave it go like that. But then it's such a mammoth issue. What do we do? Now, because we were dealing with a cultural process, we called the project Theater for Development. So we were using artistic expression to analyze and dialogue on development. So myself and my colleague, Professor Mandina Lihamba, we had a lot of discussion around these challenges that we faced. And then we came up with the idea that we can use the same process of engagement through cultural processes to address this issue of gender inequality. But then we thought the best place maybe to start and reach more people would be if we started with the education system. So we thought we should try to engage with the secondary school girls and boys, because then we'll be catching them early before all these cultural attitudes against women become deeply entrenched. They should start to analyze and to understand these gender dynamics so that they can live a different type of life than their mothers and fathers and their grandparents. So that's when we came up with this project, which later became quite big, which is called Tuseme. Tuseme is the Swahili word, which means let us speak out. So we developed a model whereby through using the arts, school children at the secondary school level could actually analyze this whole issue of gender inequality in all aspects. So the process is such that the boys and girls would research or would review their community, would bring up issues that they thought were problematic in terms of gender dynamics. They would come up with suggestions with an analysis of why there is such a situation. For example, why are the girls getting a rough end of the stick? Why is it girls that are being mistreated in the school environment, but in the community as a whole? So they will do an analysis and then come up with a conclusion whether it was fair or not fair. If it was not fair, then come up with suggestions on what should be done to change or to transform the situation. This was really sensational because I remember our workshop to Tuseme in the schools. Once the girls and boys did that kind of analysis, you could actually see them getting this realization, or actually getting quite engaged in the situation, and starting to realize that actually there are a lot of things that are being done which are not fair and are not correct for the girls. Like, I remember the way boys used to, I mean, they started like dorsal, but then after the analysis, when then they were confronted with the question, why are you treating women like this? Is it right or is it wrong? And why exactly are women being treated like this? Then they reach a realization that actually it was not fair. They were just being treated like that because somebody somewhere decided that's how women should be treated, but actually it shouldn't be done that way. So by doing that, we raised the awareness of both boys and girls and the school community, including the teachers as a whole, on the issues of gender equality. And we had some very, very fascinating results by going through such processes. One example I remember, for example, there was a lot of abusive language that is being used against girls in the schools by the teachers and by the the male students. So we went through a process of unearthing what kind of language is being used in the classroom, outside the classroom, by whom. What kind of language do the teachers use when they address girls? And a lot of information came up that showed that the language was very sexually abused, especially for the girls. In fact, in all the schools we did this exercise, the teachers were shocked that they were actually using such language. They were using that language without even realizing that it was wrong. So they were saying, you know, I've been using this kind of language without realizing what kind of damage it can cause, but actually it's terrible. Oh my God, I feel terrible. I remember one teacher saying, Professor, why are you coming now? Why didn't you come 10 or 15 years ago? Now I think back and all the girls that I've mistreated, I really feel like crying. This was a male teacher, but even the female teachers were using the same language. So the whole idea of Tuseme was actually to empower the girls for gender equality, but also to empower the boys for gender equality. Because we thought if we don't leave the boys out, because boys are part of the dynamic of everything that is happening in terms of gender inequality. So at the end of it, really our intention was to empower both boys and girls and men and women in relation to the teachers so that they can practice gender equality in the school community. So that was one of my major. Am I taking too much time?
No.
Because I have other things I can talk about. Maybe I can come to them later.
Okay. Thank you so much for that highlight. Come back to your work. What drew you to your work you do or what you have done? How did you first come to be involved in work in this area? And how has this involvement changed over time? Has your work changed in a ways that has shaped the experience from your own life? Or have you experienced any personal changes as a result of your engagement in feminist academic work? Yeah, part of it is related to what you have said, but you might have more to add into this. Karibu.
I'll focus on the work that I've done, which is gender related.
Okay.
Yeah? As I said, I came to get involved in gender work because of the realization of the gender inequalities that were in existence in my workplace, at the university, but also in the community as I went out to work in the communities. So the gender inequalities were so stuck that I was just touched to do something about it. But I must also say that my generation, we were like the vanguard generation after independence, right?
Yeah.
There were a lot of changes that were happening in our countries, many African countries, effort for self-independence, for self-determination, for self-identity. So my generation was engaged in a lot of processes to bring about change. And we were engaged in processes of change in terms of the, for example, from the academic point of view, in terms of even the content of what was being taught in our schools, in terms of the content of what we are teaching at the university, in terms of asserting our African identity, in terms of asserting that we are an independent nation. So I think we were fortunate that we were embroidered in this movement of change. So we were thinking of change all the time. And as academician and as at that time the most highly educated segment of the population, it was like our obligation to engage in this change so that we can assist our nation to reach whatever goals that the nation had set itself for after becoming independent. So I think this was a situation that was a very good catalyst for us to venture into things to try to bring about change. So even the issue of gender movement, gender activism, I always look at it also from that point of view. Because when we got independence, it was clear that there was need for women development. We had some political movement about gender equality represented at that time, which sounds funny if you say it today, represented at that time by UWT, you know, the Umoja wa Wanawake, the National Women Organization.
Okay.
UWT. Okay. At that time, it was actually very active in trying to bring about change for the development of women. You know, the activists of today, we normally forget that part of our history, that it was actually the gender activism was started by UWT, which was a political wing, because they're the ones who are going out into the rural areas, bringing out the issues about gender inequality, pushing for women to go to school, pushing for women to be given programs so that they can develop themselves, starting even income generating activities for women just to change the situation of women. So in their own way, they were also part of that change, because we got independence. We want to start our nation. Our generation were pushed into activism for gender equality because we were also in that time of change, that time of dynamics of change. I think that is one aspect that I think that drove us to work very, very seriously on bringing about change, also for issues of gender. So me personally, those are the kind of factors that pushed me into the work on gender equality, and of course, seeing it on a day-to-day basis wherever you go, different types of inequalities, you could see them. And also, as an educated woman at that time, one of a few educated women, we are constantly confronted with this gender discriminatory kind of practices from our colleagues, from the community, and all that. So we couldn't lose we couldn't lose focus on that. There was a problem that we needed to address.
Okay, thank you. Reflection on your work now. How do you understand the term feminism? What has it meant to your work? we're relating to your work now. Can you tell us something about the relationship with other members within your own maybe institutions? What are some of your expectations of your institutions?
Well, I must say that at the beginning of my engagement with the gender equality activism, it was more of a push to answer an immediate need. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was like pushed by a practical situation on the ground. That this is happening, we have to do this. There is this policy, we have to fight it so that it treats both men and women fairly. There is this issue which if we don't address, the women will get a raw deal. So it was like trying to respond to a practical problem. But later on, the movement, this feminism movement, really helped me to articulate issues related to gender equality in a much better way, ideologically, philosophically, and academically. It was sort of now giving you an analysis on a broader perspective. So it isn't just gender inequality as you see it in your home or in your classroom or in your workplace, but analyzing gender equality as a bigger issue, global, bigger issues related to systems, related to patriarchy, related to bigger forces, that in order for whatever work that needed to be done, it was important to understand these broader faces. So that was a very important aspect of my own development in terms of my engagement in gender activism.
Okay. Yeah, we are on it together, yes. So like, how do you perceive the relationship between scholarship and activism in general and in your own work?
In my own work, I think there are a number of, maybe a few things there. In my own work, for example, I talked about Tuseme, right? You know, on the one hand, Tuseme is activism on the ground, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you need to apply scholarship to understand the dynamics of gender inequalities within the context of the school, the context of the community, the context of the country. So in terms of the scholarship, the feminism scholarship and the activism that I was engaging practically, I think there was a very good link, because otherwise the interpretation of what was happening on the ground would have been quite superficial. So for example, even though we were dealing with the young girls and boys, we couldn't go and expound gender equality from a scholarly point of view, but we needed to guide them that gender inequalities, for example, has a lot to do with patriarchy, for example. So they had not only to see their inequality in terms of how the boys were treating them, but in terms of how the whole community behaves in men and in relation to the relationship between men and women. So that is scholarship, which is feeding into the practical practical application at that time. And there is another aspect to my work where I found this relationship even better, because I've also been involved in another big thing, which is not popularly known as gender responsive pedagogy. I was engaged, actually, when I was working with FAWE. I've forgotten to mention that I worked with the Forum for African Women Educationalists for 9 years as the executive director of that forum. And the short form is FAWE. And FAWE is an organization which is operating in over 35 countries in Africa. And basically, FAWE is engaged in the promotion of girls' education at all levels. Now, while I was at FAWE, myself and my colleagues, we developed this gender responsive pedagogy model. The whole idea was to change the teaching and learning processes in the schools and wherever to make them gender responsive. This was after working with the schools in our effort to bring about to improve girls' participation in education. And when we realized that there were a lot of gender constraints in the dynamics of the school itself, the way things were taught, the way students were learning, the school environment, relationships between boys and girls, between teachers and students, there were so many issues that needed to be addressed. So we came up with this model, which looks at gender responsive pedagogy, which means that the teacher must apply gender inequality in whatever process of teaching and learning that happens in the school. Because the gender inequality is actually embedded in those processes. And if they're not addressed, then the gender inequality is perpetuated. For example, if the teacher prepares a lesson plan, doesn't take into account the need for equal participation of boys and girls, he or she will perpetuate the less participation of girls. If the teacher, in interacting with the students, uses abusive language against girls, he or she will perpetuate the gender inequalities. If the teacher picks teaching and learning materials that have a lot of gender stereotypes and uses them in teaching, it means he or she is perpetuating the gender inequalities. So we had to actually come up with a model that addresses every aspect of teaching and learning to make it gender responsive. Now, in doing so, we couldn't do that if we didn't apply scholarship on pedagogy, because we had to understand the whole process of teaching and learning, the pedagogical philosophies or the pedagogical approaches in education. We had to apply that scholarship to our activism in changing the teaching and learning process. Scholarship feeds on the practical application, although practical application also feeds into the scholarship. But in all my work, I've really found the two work together very well, and it is important that the two are linked.
Thank you. Coming to our fifth section, the intersection of your work with the women movement in the country and globally. What is your analysis or evaluation or expectation of the development of feminism in this country? And what is the relationship with other women's organizations in this country, with other activists? And how do you think about your work in relation to women movement? So basically, how do you interrelate?
Let me start with the first part, the development of feminism in this country. Did I get it right?
Yeah, what is your analysis, yes, of development of feminism in this country?
Let me start with that one, and then you remind me the other parts. I'm very happy to see that actually feminism has grown quite a lot in this country. And I'm particularly happy that the younger generation is really getting quite engaged in this whole issue of feminism and fighting for equal rights between women and men. And I sit in many, when I sit in different meetings and watch these young people articulate feminism and their belief that we have to advocate for, we have to fight for the equal opportunity and equal rights of men and women in all spheres of life. I get quite encouraged that the movement has really moved on to a point that quite a number of people now understand. And I'm saying this because, again, in my generation, the word feminism came in a manner that it was like it was a bad word. Because when the word feminism was introduced in this country, like in the 1970s, people had a very bad view of it. 1970s, late 60s, this was the time that feminism was very active in the Western world, right?
Yeah.
But to us was like feminism is equal to women women refusing to be women, yeah. And it was equated to, because there was one time like a demonstration, I think it was in the US or somewhere, where women decided they will not put on bras, or they will wear what they want. They should not be told what to wear. And it was part of the movement of the 60s. But the interpretation that came to us was that these are like mad women. They do things which are really, it was like frivolous, and they have nothing to do with our situation here, with our culture. And it's a movement where women just want to reject men. There was a lot of misinterpretation around the word feminism. So it was so much so that for a time, people didn't even want to associate themselves with the word feminism because it had a bad meaning. But I'm glad to see that now it has been a sort of, the meaning has become clear, and people understand now feminism as it ought to be understood. But this has meant a lot of work has been done to reach that point. But I'm glad that has happened. My only worry, or my only concern, and this is really a big concern, is to what extent our feminism movement is really reaching the majority of the Tanzanians. It is, in my opinion, it really is a movement of a few, basically in the urban areas, basically in the elite class, basically in those who have been exposed to high level kind of reading and exposure to dialogue on feminism. But if you take the ordinary Tanzanian, even the ones who are in urban areas, the majority of them wouldn't even understand the term. You see what I mean? Yeah. If you go to the rural areas, that's even worse. Because in the rural areas, even, I mean, the word would not even make any sense. Although the challenge here is whether we should link the term feminism to the struggles for gender equality generally. Because if you look at Tanzania generally, both in the urban area and in the rural areas, now people understand what gender equality is all about. Even if you go to the village, Now they know. You will hear them say, women should also talk. Why are you men only talking all the time? Or you'd hear women saying, no, that is not correct. We need equality, bwana. Equality, we have to be treated. So they know that it's important to address gender equality, although the situation is still not very good in terms of actual practice, because there's still a lot of inequalities that are being practiced. But my argument is that it's what is happening in terms of improvements or developments in gender equality is not necessarily tied to the term feminism. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. It's not necessarily tied to the term feminism, right? Yeah. But there's quite a lot of work happening in terms of trying to achieve gender equality at different levels. So I don't know if that is a problem, or it should just stand, or maybe feminism is more at the scholarship level, or feminism is more at the advocacy level, at the movement level. But I think we should be aware of that. I don't know what to call it, but that labeling. I don't know, because if you just say feminism, I mean, the majority of people won't understand, but they understand the concept of gender equality. Maybe that's something we should continue debating and discussing. Okay. And, okay, the next part of the question was
what is your relationship with other women's organizational institutions in this country, or with other activists, and your work in relationship with women's movement?
First of all, I must say, really, a lot of my work has been in the area of education, right? So if you take off to SEME, if you talk of GRP, if you talk of my work at the university, it has really been in the area of education.
Yeah.
So my engagement has really been with the educationists. Although the educationists as such do not have a movement. I mean, like, I don't think there is a movement of feminism for women in education or something like that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that the women in the education sector are not engaged in the processes for education. So for example, to SEME, we created quite a big network of teachers and the students themselves that have gone through to SEME, and until now they are pushing for girls' empowerment wherever they are, even though they are not organized as members of a particular network that has a name or that has a label. But I take them as being a network because they're active in actually implementing this whole process of enabling girls and boys to be empowered on gender equality. I would say the same with the GRP. For example, right now, I'm engaged with the tutors of teacher training colleges, because we are training all tutors into the gender responsive pedagogy.
Okay.
And the ones we've already trained, they're already engaged in the work in the teacher training colleges across the country. They are not formed into a network with a name or with a label, but they're a network in terms of actually practicing gender responsive pedagogy, because they've been trained, they've accepted the philosophy behind gender responsive pedagogy, and they're bringing about change in their colleges by practicing whatever they are practicing. And in that context, I go back to FAWE, the Forum for African Women Education, for which I worked for 9 years. In order to do our work of promoting girls' education in the 35 countries, we really had to work with a large network of people. And we worked through what we call national chapters. So national chapters had a membership of FAWE, and they took up the challenge of making sure that they promote girls' education, that girls in their country are admitted, they go to school, they stay in school, they perform well. So they're activists at that level by bringing about change, fighting for gender responsive policies, and doing whatever they could to change the situation of girls' participation in education. Now, if you take the 35 chapters and the members in every chapter, that was a very big network. It is still there. It is still there, a big network. And I worked very closely with that network during my 9 years working with FAWE. But here in Tanzania, I've also worked with the Tanzania Gender Networking Program, which, as you know, is a very, very active organization in pushing the gender agenda and feminism, and they're really like the top organization in the country. And yeah, that's my answer to your question.
Thank you. Coming to the last one, connection to international forms of activism and scholarship. Do you have any connection with other activists, scholars, organizations in other countries? And how did these connections come about? And what have they meant to your own work? And how do they make sense of differences and similarities in kinds of issues raised, approaches taken by these activists, scholars, or organizations?
My connections at the international level really has basically been on the individual level. People I have met, for example, in conferences. People we have worked together on gender-related projects. People we have attended conferences together and took up some action to push the gender agenda. So it's like people that I know on the individual basis. Although when I was with FAWE, I worked very closely with the United Nations Girls Education Initiative. That is an initiative which we used to push the girls' agenda at the United Nations. And it really helped because the UN, you know, has access to all the countries who are member states. So through UNGAI, we did quite a lot of work to try to reach the different countries that are member states in the whole agenda of gender in relation to education.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor, for your time. And it's always an honor to have the opportunity to talk with you. Asante sana.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I'm glad you made me think about my life and come up with the issues that you raised. It was my pleasure participating in this interview, Annette. Thank you very much.